Thank you, Sam. Welcome to Sunday worship at the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Burlington. This meeting house in this beautiful place between the lake and the mountains is located on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Western Abnaki people. We acknowledge being here, that we share responsibility in that troubled history, and for stewardship of the land and the water and the air on which all life depends. I'm the Reverend Patricia Hart, Developmental Senior Minister of this congregation, and though its people, you, are not all in one place, our hearts and our shared commitment to be and to build a world of beauty and justice holds us together in love and hope and joy. Wherever you are in body, however close or far away, whether this society has been your spiritual home for your whole life or you're joining us today for the first time, I am glad that you are here with us online. So, happy fall. In these weeks, when it's still not wise to gather together inside, and when the leaves display and the fresh, cool air bring lots of us outside as much as possible during these weeks for the month of October, and starting today, we are creating as many opportunities as we can dream up to be not only online, live streamed every Sunday morning, and on Zoom for coffee hour every Sunday morning at 11, but also outside. So 11 o'clock is when it all begins out there, the children's program to which the rest of us are invited is going to start at 11 in the Memorial Garden. And thanks to David McFeeters for so many things, but one of the most important, coffee hour is back and will be happening outside, probably just outside the Memorial Garden, every single week that the weather lets us. Vespers is also back every other Wednesday starting last week at 6 p.m. in the Memorial Garden. It happens pretty much right after the end of the Love and Justice Vigil, which happens on the sidewalk. We wave and connect with the people, especially the ones driving by. You can come to 5:15 every single Wednesday. And then every other Wednesday, you can come to the Memorial Garden at 6 and come to Vespers. Reverend David Ruffin and a growing Vespers team is leading these informal services. And if you haven't been to Vespers, either in person outside or online, I hope that you will come if you can. There's space outside for about 30 people. There are often fewer than that. Everybody's at a distance, and we do wear masks, though we also sing, and there's sharing that happens. You can also watch that on Zoom. This is a congregation that is learning how to gather in more than one way. Online, in person, on Zoom, through small connections by email or text or notes or presents, any way we can. That is only possible thanks to so many staff members, Erica Reef and Margot Whitcomb, who are creating these children's programs, Rowan Van Ness, our ministerial intern, who today is actually outside in the Memorial Garden helping with that program, along with Cheryl Herrick. I'm grateful to both of them. I'm grateful to David Ruffin. I'm grateful to the OWL facilitators. OWL is actually happening in this building today, too. I'm grateful to Christina Fulton and Mary Williams for coordinating an increasingly complicated calendar of inside and outside events, to Peggy Derby for the flowers, to Woody Fulton for making the technology work. And you should know maybe that some wrestling with the cameras and the ability to zoom and move them has been has been happening for the last hour and is now mostly resolved. So life is exciting here. Grateful to James for his music as well, along with Sam Whitesell. And my happy announcement is that Wayne Schneider will be playing the organ during the service next Sunday and every first Sunday of the year. Thumbs up from lots of us, including James and Woody. Whoever you are, whatever burdens and joys you bring, whatever it takes for you to be here right now, you and all of that are welcome. Let us worship. Say the chalice lighting words with me. We kindle this chalice flame to remind ourselves of the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. Today's call to worship is from the Reverend Scott Taylor, who was inspired by the words of John Shar. He calls this building the possible. May this flame cast its light toward the coming days, reminding us that the future is not simply a place we are going, but a place we are creating. The path of new possibilities will not be found, but made. A new world is waiting to be built. May our time together light the way. For our reflection this morning, we're going to show you a video. This is a piece about truth and about trees that Martha Dallas introduced to me to a number of weeks ago. And I've watched it now a few times, and there's wisdom here. So I welcome you to watch the true story of True.
Everyone knows that stories are made up of words, from short poems to epic novels. But did you know that a single word itself can tell an entire story? You see, just as we can look at a story's plot, setting, and characters, we can also study the history of an individual word, where it developed, and the cultures and people who helped shape it. Looking into the story of a word is like counting the rings of a tree. Newer words like Google or cyborg have shorter stories. But the older the word, the longer the story, and the more it stands to reveal to us, not only about itself, but about ourselves and our history. The oldest words in present-day English are those that come from Old English, the ancestor of our modern language, whose first seeds were planted about 1,500 years ago. Compared to languages like Greek or Chinese that date back thousands of years, English is just a sapling in the lexical forest. But the stories of its words often start long before English itself took root. One such word is the familiar word true, as in true stories. Let's take a look. True usually means factual, correct, or faithful to reality. It can also mean exact, properly positioned, upright, or straight. A true friend is loyal, reliable, faithful, and steadfast. The word true is a simple word, and we can add some affixes to grow its family tree with words like truer, truest, truly, truth, and untruth. But if we go in the other direction, to look at the roots of true itself, we find even more relatives further up the family tree. The words trust, betroth, and truce all derive from the same source as true, and these words all denote faithfulness or confidence. 1,000 years ago, the word true looked and sounded different than it does today. In several Old English dialects, the word treo was a noun that meant good faith or trust, a pledge or a promise. But it also had another definition, tree. And that's no coincidence. If we trace the roots back even farther, we find that both meanings derive from a common origin, where some of the earliest expressions of the concept of truth were associated with the uprightness of an oak, the steadiness of a silver birch, and the fidelity of an orchard bearing fruit year after year. This may sound like a stretch at first, but trees are the oldest living organisms on this planet. Some that would have been called treo long ago still stand today. The Fordingal yew in Scotland is more than 2,000 years old. A Californian bristlecone pine is more than 5,000. And Utah's Pando Quaking Aspen Grove has a single root system that dates back more than 80 millennia. Trees have also held a sacred place in many cultures throughout history. The Celtic peoples who first inhabited the British Isles believed that trees housed deities. And in fact, the ancient Druids take their name from the same ancient root as tree. Planting a tree is itself an act of faith and commitment. Not only are trees upright and prototypically straight, but they are actual, solid, and real, something you can see and touch. And they are as reliable and steadfast to us today as they were a millennium ago, nurturing us, sheltering us, and providing the pages of our books. Philosophers and poets, people in search of the truth, have often sought it in trees. What did the tree learn from the earth to be able to talk with the sky? Asked Pablo Neruda. A tree falls the way it leans, says an old proverb. Just as trees mark our landscapes and witness our histories, the stories of words landscape our language, capturing the rains and sunshine of generations and sending roots and branches far and wide. As there is a whole orchard in a single seed, there is a whole story in a single word. And that's the truth.
So take a breath. Or maybe two. For just a few moments together, let us be still and attentive, aware of the world, aware of those we love, wherever they may be. Aware of our connections to one another, even when we are far away. On this day that we are paying attention to the earth and the trees and the air and the water and everything, I pulled out this much used book of earth prayers that has been with me since the beginning of my ministry. A meditation from Thich Nhat Hanh. As we are together praying for peace, let us be truly with each other. Let us pay attention to our breathing. Let us be relaxed in our bodies and our minds. Let us return to ourselves and become wholly ourselves. Let us maintain a half smile on our faces. Let us be aware of the source of being common to us all and to all living things. Evoking the presence of the great compassion, let us fill our hearts with our own compassion towards ourselves and towards all living beings. Let us pray that all living beings realize that they are all brothers and sisters, all siblings nourished from the same source of life. Let us pray that we ourselves cease to be the cause of suffering to each other. Let us plead with ourselves to live in a way which will not deprive other beings of air, water, food, shelter, or the chance to live. with humility, with awareness of the existence of life and of the sufferings that are going on around us. Let us pray for the establishment of peace in our hearts and on earth. Amen. There are joys and sorrows among us every week and today. The joy of life, the joy of nature, the joy of possibility, the sorrow of loss and destruction and uncertainty. It is good and right in our worship together to remember that we can hold those joys and those sorrows together. One particular joy and sorrow today from Stephen. Joy and sorrow that our dad, Andrew, is released from his body and no longer dealing with dementia, Alzheimer's. Peace and love to you, Dad. Peace and love to all of us. During the silence, I will place just a few of our stones of joy and sorrow up here where we can see them, and remember that they are always with us and that we can hold each other in all of it.
For the earth forever turning, for the skies, for every sea, for our lives, for all we cherish, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the mountains, hills, and pastures, in their silent majesty, for the stars, for all the heavens, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the sun, for rain and thunder, for the seasons' harmony, for our lives, for all creation, sing we our joyful praise to thee. For the world we raise our voices, for the home that gives us birth. In our joy we sing, returning home to our blue-green hills of earth.
I remind you every week that we take up an offering every week to support the work of this congregation in the world, to remember that we're the ones who do it, and also that our gifts go beyond this congregation and are shared with organizations in the community that are doing the work, that our principles, our values, our commitments tell us needs to be done. The beneficiary for this month of September through today has been and is still the Chittenden Area Asylum Seekers Network, a group of people from this congregation and others who work with some people, one by one family at a time, who are seeking asylum, who are seeking a new home in this part of the world. Your financial gifts go to make a difference, to allow CASN to actually be helpful to those families. Your gifts of attention go even farther than that. And today, to help us announce this offering, we have a short video from Stephen Tendo, who is a person who is now living in Vermont, but who, while he was in detention, coming from Uganda, in detention in this country, waiting for asylum, was comforted and inspired and was able to continue because of the letters and the wishes and the hope extended by people here and many others. Some words from Stephen.
I thank God for this opportunity to speak to the entire congregation of UU Church in Burlington and in the entire country. My heart goes out to you, to appreciate you for all the support, for all the love. I received thousands and thousands of love letters from each one of you. I will never forget you. You are incredible, incomparable, surreal, unmatched, and there is nothing that I can compare to the love that you showed me when I was in incarceration in the detention center. Your work as the justice teams in the UU Church is very incredible. You don't know what it means to be in the detention center and you receive a letter from somebody telling you about their family. Your entire life moves out of that place and shares the moment with that person who wrote to you. It was something that encouraged me, that kept me going, and I believe that if you continue to do it with other people, it is something that is highly valuable, that it will keep them going in that I nicknamed it the Valley of the Shadow of Death, the detention center. Thank you so much. Secondly, I would love to thank personally Caroline Smiles, Sal Milichamp of Burlington, and also thank Myra of Arizona, and Serena and Pastor Joe of Arizona. Those were very close and personal, and they used to call me on videos in the detention center, and we used to share hearts, our hearts together. And there is nothing that I can give them to appreciate them, but they are so much loved in my heart. Not only them, including each one of you who did whatever you could to support me. I request you kindly to support the justice groups in the UU Church because they are doing an incredible job. May God bless you.
So there's one more way that you could help if you are moved to do that. Bernie and Sal and Carolyn and the members of the Immigration Justice Team want you to know that they meet on the third Monday of every month at 5 o'clock on Zoom, and they would love to welcome you. The link is always available on the website. This morning's offering and every week's offering we dedicate to in the service of the mission of this congregation, to search for spiritual truth, to care for ourselves and one another, to seek truth, and to act for justice. This morning's offering will now be gratefully received. If, like me, you have been listening to the fundraising campaign on VPR this week, you would have been reminded, James liked that I mentioned that, I know we've all contributed. One of the things that the brave and valiant, and I don't know how you do it, people who talk us through that fundraising campaign reminded me this week is that one goal of public radio is to help assure that we have an informed community, informed citizens, in fact. And I was struck by that, not because I don't agree with it, I do, but it struck me that that's one of our goals too. One of the goals of this congregation and of Unitarian Universalist congregations and, in the best of all possible worlds, all religious communities. Our purpose is to help people grow spiritually, to think and act ethically, to deepen compassion, to care about justice, and to be informed. What we're trying to be is people who care about the world enough to keep seeking to understand it more. It is, I would assert, part of our religious work to make society stronger and better, because unlike some other religions, we are focused on this life, not the next. And that includes inspiring and encouraging people to learn, not just about religion, but also about civics, to name one area where we seem to be lacking, and not just civics in the way our government is organized, but the philosophy and the theology that undergirds it. There's a sermon in that which I will give you at some point. To know enough of the fullest versions of history, our history, the world's history, this country and this community's, not stories that have been edited and simplified to make people feel better, and, by the way, to take less responsibility for the challenges that we all share right now. Maybe feel, with the simpler stories, less guilty about when we're complacent. I think also to be informed, if you will, about mystery, about cosmic truths that cannot yet be explained, and definitely informed about emerging science that is creatively, all the time, undermining the certainties of established truths that have been accepted for decades. In the Unitarian Universalist Church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where Peter and I served, there were, you may have heard me say this before, stained glass windows through the entire church with images in them of not saints exactly, but real human beings who the founder of that church called emancipators of the human spirit. And in one of the windows, the last one on the east side, as it happens, in that church, it was the scientist window. And Charles Darwin and Gregor Mendel were two of the scientists who were held up there. We need all of this civics, history, theology, philosophy, mystery, and science, not separately, because they're not separate in life, but all mixed up together. There's a special opportunity happening this year at First UU. This fall, outside in the Memorial Garden and on Zoom, in addition to children's programs on Sunday and Vespers on Wednesdays, there are also Shabbat services offered by the congregation Ruach HaMakom. That congregation is renting space in the meeting house, inside and outside, as their building in the Old North End undergoes restoration. They are really happy to be here. And they're also really happy for anyone from the society to join them on these every other Friday nights. I hope to make it a little bit easier for people to find that info so you can know what time and that you're welcome through the First UU website. And I have invited Rabbi Jan Saltzman to join in a Sunday worship here. We're negotiating the date. I hope it is soon. Right now, and being celebrated this morning, is the time in the Jewish year of the Harvest Festival, which falls right after the High Holy Days, known as Sukkot. Erica Reef and I attended the Sukkot Shabbat on Friday night, and the children's program this morning in the Memorial Garden is also about Sukkot, and the kids, and perhaps some of you, if you come, are going to spend some time in the temporary outdoor shelter that has been assembled in our Memorial Garden, the Sukkah. Sukkot is all about gratitude for and love for, gratitude to, and love for the earth, to celebrate the connection with nature. This year also happens to be the Shemitah year. Shemitah means letting go. It's the 7th year in the cycle, and every 7th year is a year of resting and releasing, not planting or harvesting any crops in the tradition so that the soil can recover from the prior 6 years of planting and harvesting. It is also a year in which the people are told to forgive debts, to restore relationships. In ancient times, the Shemitah year was a time to free people from enslavement, to release servants from their indenture. It's a celebration about the earth restoring itself, and it's also about human communities taking responsibility to make such restoration possible, to let the land have a Sabbath. This is an ancient tradition, of course. It's good spiritual work, and it's also good agricultural practice. It is, in fact, good science. Decades ago, the college I went to had created a new curriculum, which was very liberal. The deal was that except for prescribed courses that one needed to complete a major, students were not required to take any particular courses as undergraduates. You just had to pass a certain number of them. You could actually fail a few along the way with no penalty, and then you could graduate. In other words, I could take as many history and music and philosophy and literature classes as I wanted. Curiously, I did not opt for anything in the religion department, and I could skip math and science entirely. My father insisted that I take one economics class, so I did, but no science, no math. My young adult self found this liberating and delightful. My grown-up self feels the lack more and more every year. I've been trying to learn some more science of late. This has been sparked to some extent by the pandemic, as we are all trying to understand what this virus is, what it's doing, how we need to respond and adapt. I'm studying as a faithful person because taking care of one another, the people we know and everyone else too, which is core to our religious identity, depends in part on our understanding the science, which we say we're following. We're following the science. That's what we're all trying to do. We need to understand it as well as we can in order to follow it. The world keeps changing, or actually our understanding of the world keeps changing, which requires us to change too, which is all about learning. The pandemic is forcing that on in our lives, and climate change in a way that is so large, it's really hard to take in. But the earth is here to teach us what we don't yet know. Our job is to be good students. I've always loved trees, like I imagine many of you. There were 2 big red maples in the front yard in my house when I was a child, and I could see them from my bedroom. There was also a gnarly old tree that sort of shaded the whole backyard, which was slightly scary but also comforting. I did wonder what gnomes might be living around its roots. My tree fascination grew a couple of years ago, partly because I moved to Vermont and I was worried about long winters and months of trees without leaves. I hadn't even heard of stick season yet till I got here, but I have found that by watching carefully, trees we can find are almost always doing something. And then a couple of Christmases ago, I read Richard Powers' novel, The Overstory. I know that a number of you have read that book too. I really was so taken with it, I wanted to preach about it, but I had literally no idea how. It's a long fable of interlocking stories about people who learn about trees and forests, who catch a glimpse of the vast networks connecting trees to each other and the earth, and about how people are endangering, destroying these natural networks on which life depends. Destroying because they don't know what's really happening. Even though it's right in front of us, it's invisible. And now I'm reading another book, this one. It's called Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest by Suzanne Simard. It was just published this year, and it's actually pretty hard to find this book in libraries. Lots of people are checking it out. I cannot recommend it too highly, not only for the science, but because it's a thriller, the way it's written. Suzanne Simard is a scientist. She calls herself a forester. She grew up in a logging family in British Columbia, and she spent her whole life in forests. Her family was in the forestry business. She tried to do that as well, but because that business had changed, because of clear cutting, because forests that she had known as something that would always be there were in trouble, she took a different path. Simard has spent decades pursuing the idea that trees, rather than being separate individuals competing with each other to survive, are in fact interconnected. Through vast underground networks of roots but also fungi, trees share carbon and other nutrients essential to life. They share it. All trees do this, and to some extent, but especially the hub trees, the mother trees, as she calls them, the oldest, largest, most highly connected trees in the forest. They do compete, but they also cooperate, and they do it, as far as the science has told us, to help each other survive. Taller, larger trees that get more sunlight compensate smaller trees that are in the shade by passing on the resources they need to survive. Trees can send warnings through these networks of pests and disease. They can communicate and share not only with their own species, but with other kinds of trees too. And when these large hub mother trees die, they pass on what they have to smaller trees around them as they are declining, and then as dead trees for years after they're no longer standing, if they're allowed to decay in place. You may well have heard some of these remarkable facts. You may have thought, I've always had a feeling, but it has taken a long time, many, many decades in which not only the forest industry, but academia and everything mainstream dismissed this as nonsense. Suzanne Simard began to sense that cutting whole forests to harvest the most wood was bad for the trees, including the little seedlings that were planted to replace all the trees that had been cut. Somehow those little trees needed other trees around them to thrive or even to survive. But she didn't have any proof, and she was just a young woman at the beginning without credentials. She had to learn to do science, and then experiments, and then more and more experiments before her work was taken seriously. The Overstory, that novel, it tells this story and others, and it is apocalyptic in its beauty. The message is it's already too late, or perhaps an unimaginable to us future beyond the future that's coming at us so far, maybe. Suzanne Simard is supposedly an inspiration for one of the characters in the Overstory. But the message that Suzanne Simard is giving us now in this book and in the videos, there are many of them. I hope that you will indulge yourself and watch some of her TED Talks or other videos. The message that she's giving us is actually hopeful. She used that word in her epilogue. Hopeful not only because she's been inspired by the brilliant intricacies of these tree networks, the resourcefulness and what looks like compassion of trees for each other. She's hopeful not only because science is proving that competition is present but does not always prevail. In fact, often cooperation, collaboration works better in the long run. She's also hopeful, though, because of all the evidence that human beings can learn and change. Sometimes when it seems nothing will budge, she writes, there's a shift. The free-to-grow policy that the lumber companies have used, which is eliminate everything from the field, including other trees and other native plants, so that theoretically the seedlings can have all of the rain and the sun and the nutrition. That policy, which demonstrably has not worked as well as it might, but was still continued and is now still continuing, it began to be revamped in the year 2000, 20 years ago. A few birches and aspens were left in some of the clear cuts among the seedlings. And she points out that this happened even though fundamental attitudes had not really changed. But things were shifting anyway. And she says that she knows that that was because young foresters were out on the land, studying and learning and experimenting and believing in forest diversity and believing in the old trees. We have the power to shift course, she says. It's our disconnectedness and lost understanding about the amazing capacities of nature that's driving a lot of our despair. And plants in particular are objects of our abuse. By understanding their sentient qualities, our empathy and love for trees and plants and forests will naturally deepen and find innovative solutions. She urges us to turn to the intelligence of nature itself as the key. And she says, it's up to each and every one of us. So, her advice to end: connect with plants, with your garden. Go find a tree, your tree. Imagine linking into that tree's network and connecting to other trees nearby. Open your senses. The challenge here is that at the same time, we need to hold in our mind, in ourselves, the reality of the enormity of the climate crisis we are in, and also the miracle and the science and the reality that there are people like Suzanne Simard and all of her students, and perhaps some of us, who are believing in nature, who are strengthening our own connections with it, who are hopeful, So may it be. So may it blessed be.
Though below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on. Breathe the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my
Say the words with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and share with the world all the time, and until we are together again. The benediction from Robert Mabry Doss. For all who see God, may God go with you. For all who embrace life, may life return your affection. And for all who seek a right path, may a way be found and the courage to take it step by step. Go in peace and come on over here if you want for a coffee and the Memorial Garden program, or on Zoom. I hope to see you soon.